ответы на вопросы. Она появится здесь, в скайпе, и, пожалуйста, все вопросы по ее презентации. Понятно, да? Ну, давайте тогда начнем.
Either partially or wholly owned. So this talk is about how do we blend in, how do we make our programs work when we're working in a digital environment as well. So sadly, doble utro is the end of my Russian. I did study Russian briefly when I was at university. Unfortunately, my teacher, who was Irish, I'm Irish, so that makes sense, but he had lived in Russia for a long time and loved Russian. So he told us stories about Russia, about when he lived in Russia, stories about people that he met in Russia. And it was very interesting, but it was all in English. So we didn't actually learn an awful lot of Russian. So in this talk, we're going to look at how he could have made that a little bit more tailored to what we really needed and to the objectives that we might have had. So if we think about language and its similarities to driving a car, what do you think might be in common between learning a language and learning to drive a car? We've got knowledge and we need skill. So it's not just a subject like history or the stories of your life in Russia, but you need an awful lot. You need to know an awful lot, and you need to be able to do an awful lot. So in terms of knowledge, we need to provide our students with opportunities to discover that knowledge, so the vocabulary, the grammar, all of the basics. We need to give them the age to understand them. We also need to provide opportunities for experimentation and practice. So when you're learning to drive a car, you don't just look at the car and learn the parts of the car. You have to get in and you have to do the moves and you have to interact with the other drivers on the roads and learn the rules, etc. So without the experimentation, finding out what works for you and practice and what is the best way to go about it, you're not really going to be successful. So this is what my Russian teacher was missing, and this is what we'll try and achieve using our blended learning tactics. So in this talk, we're going to look at language learning, we're going to look at blended learning in particular, and we're going to look at the key considerations that universities need to think about when putting the two together. So in terms of language learning, what's it all about? What is our real purpose? And what's the teacher's role within the student learning journey? And in blended learning, what tools do we need? And that's something that teachers often worry about, is the tools. But in fact, the real focus of blended learning is what we do with those tools. And then once we're in that environment, how does the teacher's role change? Is it different from when we do language learning face-to-face? Or are there things that come across into blended learning as well? And in our key considerations, we need to look at how we engage our students. Not only how do we make them do things, how do we make them want to participate in the program, and how do we make them really feel that they are working towards their goals. What changes to planning? And we are normally used to planning for lessons, and now we need to plan courses, we need to plan time in a very different way. And then monitoring, how do we make sure that students are doing what we want them to do, and how do we make sure that it is of benefit to them to do what we're asking them. So let's look first at the teacher's role. As we said, language learning is all about gaining knowledge and practicing a skill. So what is the teacher's purpose in that? So first of all, I think we'd all agree that the teacher is a guide. And guidance covers many facets. The teacher's job is to prepare logical, well-pitched lessons. And these lessons should challenge the students and give them the opportunity to discover the language or the skills for themselves. This involves asking questions to point them in the right direction, eliciting what they understand before we explain things. So if we do need to explain, that can come later. But first of all, we need to give them a push towards the answer and in the hope that they will get to it themselves. So it involves facilitating learning activities and discussions rather than just giving them everything, but creating these activities within which they can discover the language, they can discover the skills. If the students get to a point where they can't quite figure out the rules, then the teacher's fallback position is then to explain, so to fill in the gaps, as it were. So it's a different kind of gap fill from the ones we ask our students to do, but in this case, we're filling in the bits that they haven't quite understood. Always very important, and it is what our students expect of us. Relating is a very big part of a teacher's role. So we know that learners who have a good relationship with their teacher and with their peers learn better. And the teacher is the person who is responsible for setting the tone of the class, setting tasks, facilitating activities that allow relationships to flourish. And those relationships mean that the learners trust each other enough to risk making mistakes in front of each other without fear of being made fun of. Another aspect of this relationship is personalization. Teachers need to make the learning personal to the learner in terms of topics of interest and level of challenge. If we have a student who's racing ahead, we need to find ways of keeping them motivated and interested. And the same with learners who are struggling. We need to find ways of keeping them motivated and making sure they feel that they're making progress. The one thing that students always want from their teachers is feedback, something that can be very time-consuming to provide depending on how it's done and what it's about. Given the value now placed on critical thinking in academia and in the world of work, it's important also to train them to review and feedback on their own, and to review and feedback on their peers' work. Very important skills. And finally, unfortunately, there's always an element of authority involved. Making sure students have done their preparatory work before class, making sure they respect deadlines and remain on task where necessary. But we can manage this, so we don't need to be very strict, but we need to be clear and predictable in how we go about it. So when we think about blended online learning, if we're thinking mostly about blended learning for the purposes of this talk, we would traditionally think about work happening online and work happening in class. So the students do something online, the students do something in class, and the teacher is involved to a certain degree in both of those. A more realistic picture of that combination is more that there are two separate parts to the online side. So we have our face-to-face learning, as always, and that remains to be central for blended learning. We also have online self-study learning, which the students go and do by themselves with monitoring and support of the teacher. And then we have online collaborative learning, where we expect the students to communicate to achieve some sort of task. If you're running a fully online course, instead of the face-to-face learning, what you would probably have would be an online meeting, something like what we're doing today, where the teacher and the students are together at the same time, not physically, but virtually, and they have ample time to work together and react and interact with each other while completing some sort of activity. So there are three different ways that would be, and this is kind of typical Venn diagram for blended learning, although there are many different ways of actually delivering these three things. So the tools then. What are the tools? And I've used this slide before, but I have to keep updating it as more tools appear and are useful to people. So we start off with conferencing software, like I'm using today, instant messaging, which we can use during conferences, social networks, email, ebooks, LMS, a learning management system, blogs, forums, wikis, apps. The list goes on, and it will never stop going on. As we go through, this is just something that we have to contend in. 100 years ago, there was chalk and blackboards and tables and chairs, and you have to move the furniture around to allow more activities to happen. And now these are the things that we're dealing with. But do they really change the way we teach? And what extras can they actually afford us? One of my main rules of thumb when working with blended learning is to never do with technology what you can do more easily without it. So if you can do something easier face-to-face, do it face-to-face. If you can do something better in a forum, then do it in a forum. So there needs to be a particular advantage of using that tool to justify making your students and your teachers learn how to use it and to put it into practice. So there always needs to be that balance between the investment of time and effort and energy into incorporating something and the actual benefit that you get from it. So thinking about the actual activities that you can do once you have these tools, that will help you evaluate whether the tool is appropriate for your learners, for your context, and for your objectives. So this is a Wordle image of a blog that I wrote about teaching and learning online. I'm sure you've seen something like this before. Basically, the bigger the word is, the more often it appears in the piece of writing that it comes from. So as you can see, the biggest word in the blog, the most common word is students, class, work, time, learners, activities. Online is actually not very big compared to the rest of them. So while, yes, we are working online, yes, we are using other tools, but really, we're still thinking about our students as central to the process. We need to meet their needs in order for them to complete their learning, to finish their course, to get to where they're trying to get to. But the most important part is that teaching and learning, teaching is a definite skill, and we need a skilled pair of hands to do it properly. And even if you have all of these tools, or if you don't, the teaching and the principles of that activity should still be the same. So when you look at these tools, when you're thinking about going online, think about them within the context of good teaching. What is it that you want your teaching to be, and how can these tools make it what you want it to be? If you're trying to improve or add an extra element to it, what's it for? Why are you doing it? How does it benefit you and your students? So we're now online. What's the teacher's role? Oh look, the teacher is a guide. This shouldn't come as a surprise, really. So the teacher still needs to provide carefully structured tasks that provide the right opportunities for discovery. Although these tasks may involve different tools, functionality, and time periods. For instance, in a class discussion that would last 20 minutes, this will take about a week in an asynchronous form to achieve the same learning objectives. By asynchronous form, I mean when students are in a discussion, but not everybody has to be online at the same time. So, for example, I post my post, and then later on this evening, somebody will read my post and respond to it. So you need to allow the time for that to happen. And facilitating this type of activities involves deciding when to contribute and when to step back from the discussion in order to encourage more posts or keep students on task, leaving explanations for class time or for self-access materials. And there's plenty of information on the web about moderating. So being a guide in this type of activity is called moderating. Again, we have to look at the explanation. There will always be requirements to fill in the gaps. And when you have students doing career activities, they will come up with problems that you hadn't anticipated, or that you hadn't planned for, or that doesn't appear in the material that was studied beforehand, and you will need to sort that out and reconcile it with what they've already learned. Relating again is very, very important. So the use of communication tools online often means that students have more access to each other outside the class, so they could develop better relationships and feel safer with the group. This is slightly counterbalanced by the fact that anything they say or write is permanently available to the others, so they may feel reluctant to post something that the others will regard as silly. So team building activities are just as important as they would be in a face-to-face class to counteract that. In terms of personalization, teachers have greater opportunity to tap into areas of interest via the internet. As long as tasks are sufficiently well designed, teachers should be able to allow learners to explore aspects of the topic they find most engaging. With so much material out there, it should be easy to find something that will challenge stronger students while still catering to the weaker ones. For example, if the topic in the curriculum is travel, give your students a few websites to explore to find 3 specific pieces of information about a place and then compare them in the forum. They should also look for one extra interesting or surprising thing. The weaker students will be able to complete the task in its most basic form, while stronger students will be able to provide more opinion and insight and will be motivated by this. Alternatively, you could ask students to edit a story on a wiki. Weaker students will add a word or a sentence, while stronger ones will add much more detail or different perspectives or invent a new character. Everyone achieves the task to his or her ability, and knowing your students and relating to them is key to your understanding of what kind of tasks you can set and what will be interesting, motivating and challenging to your students. Moving on then to feedback. Using automatically marked exercises in your LMS or in an external self-study program, learners will get feedback much more regularly than they would in a face-to-face only situation. Teachers will need to help them interpret this feedback and train them to decide on the actions to take based on this feedback. For instance, do they need to look over the grammar a bit more? Should they practice the conversation in context with a friend to help consolidate the language? Should they spend more time writing on the blog to recycle what they've learned? Students can't always come up with these answers on their own and will need help, especially at the beginning. So again, feedback and guidance is giving them the directions into the right activity for them. Another very valuable facet of feedback is the more qualitative side, not just the percentages, but how well they achieve a task or get their idea across. It can seem daunting to have to look through long form discussions or blogs, but you don't have to correct everything they write. In fact, it's important that you don't. We do have to take a note of general mistakes relevant to language point currently under discussion, and then either have a discussion on it with students afterwards, or do some sort of activity in class that will make it better. And of course, the element of control is still there. We still need to make sure that the students are meeting their deadlines. We still need to make sure that they are achieving the learning aims that we have set and doing the activities that we need them to do. So control can come across in your assessment policy. It can also come across in your way of managing your class and how you set up if you want to have a learner contract with your students. They're old enough to sign themselves. And this is a very important way of keeping your students on task and on time. So looking then at our key considerations, so engagement. So we've got students working online, they're doing self-access activities, that's great. Are they doing all of them? Are they doing them when you said that you wanted them to do? Are they doing them to the same extent? Are they learning from it? So what you need to think about is, are they getting appropriate challenge? So is it pitched at the right level for them? So you don't want to give strong students easy things to do, but equally you don't want to over-challenge the weaker ones, because that can be just as demotivating. So making sure that you've got activities that are pitched at the right level for them. And relevance to their needs, relevance to their core subjects that they're studying or preparing for, relevance to their future careers, and relevance to their interests. This is something that will definitely make them more engaged. So if it's at the right level, it's relevant to them, and it's an activity that is achievable and interesting to do, will result in at least part of the motivation that you're trying to achieve. As I mentioned before, your assessment policy is also important. So in another university in Moscow, they have a very complete assessment policy that includes completion of particular activities online, both collaborative and self-study. So there is a motivation that comes from that as well. So you need to approach the students from two sides. One, we look at it with the carrot and stick approach. So the stick is your assessment policy, do this to get the points, and the carrot is the activities that are interesting, that work towards their overall goals, and that challenge them at the right level. And encouraging them as they go will be very motivating indeed. Planning. So up to now, working face-to-face, every Monday evening, you sit down and prepare your lessons on Tuesday morning, and possibly all day Tuesday. So you're looking at lesson by lesson preparations. It's finite, it could be 60 minutes, it could be 3 hours. Either way, it's a finite amount of time, and each lesson is a separate entity. They're linked, but they're a separate entity. When we move into working online, those units of time change. So we're not just looking at 90 minutes anymore. We're looking at the arc of the week. A little bit online, a little bit in class, a little bit online, a little bit in class. How do they interact? How do they affect each other? How would you expect your students' performance to change in class based on what they've done online or what you can reasonably ask them to do online? You need to plan the interactions carefully. So if you want to use a forum discussion, for example, you need to plan how that relates to the lesson on Tuesday and how it relates to the lesson on Thursday, what the students are going to get out of it, and how exactly their interaction is going to function. The focus of your lessons can also change, because now that you have activities that they can do online, they can research the grammar. If they're using an online course, they can do the grammar and vocabulary, the more discrete items practice. They can do that online, which frees up your class time to focus on speaking skills, on communication, and on bigger skills that really need the presence of other people to practice and for you to be able to get a good idea of how well they're doing. So the plan does change a little. The principles are the same, but obviously the timing, the interactions, and the focus will change. And monitoring. When you're monitoring what students do, you're asking 3 questions. Are they doing what they're supposed to? I.e., have they done the exercises? Have they contributed to the conversation? Are they learning from what I've asked them to do? So if they are, great, keep going the way you are and pose another challenge in the classroom. If they're not learning from it, then either they're not engaging sufficiently with the activities or the activities themselves are not appropriate for what you're trying to get them to learn. And then what do you do with that information once you've had it? Do you scold the students for not achieving as highly as you hoped? Do you encourage them to go online and do their online workbook homework, for example? Do you provide them with a different type of activity? Do you look at the language again in a different way? Do you do something more discursive? You have a lot of options. So monitoring what they're doing is not just about knowing what they're up to. It's about you making an informed decision about what to do with your class next. So blending in, overall, we have online tools, we have classroom time, we have individuals, and we have the teacher's role being the same but different. So in terms of blending in, it's about making a single experience with different kinds of activities that are all interlinked and dependent on one another. It's about keeping the student at the center of everything that you do. So thinking about them every time you plan a lesson, plan a week, plan an activity, what do they need to get out of it? It's about making a journey for the learner that goes smoothly between the different media and activity types without seeming like they're in a different world when they go online. It's about addressing students' needs and interests in the world they live in now, rather than taking the opportunity to reminisce about past adventures like my old Russian teacher did. And if we're sensible about it, we can do all this within the framework of our own understanding and experience of teaching, with just some minor adjustments to enrich that teaching and tap into a universe of possibility. Thank you very much.
Hello. Hi, Deidre. Hello. Hello. Nice to see you after the presentation. Hi. Thanks a lot for your information, presentation. And now I will ask the audience if they have any questions to you, okay?
Okay, great.
Okay. Так, дорогие коллеги, пожалуйста, вопрос, если вы чего-то поймали.
So what are the main benefits of the blended learning, to your mind? How can you
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, please?
Yes, yes. What are the main benefits of blended learning, to your mind?
Well, I think there are several, but one of the very most important benefits, as far as I'm concerned, is the fact that you can really maximize the use of the classroom. So you have much more opportunity to give more practice, more interaction, more speaking in the classroom that you wouldn't ordinarily have. Because as teachers, we're often under a lot of pressure to get through a lot of material, to teach a lot of grammar, to practice a lot of reading. These are things that we can delegate to an online environment where students can do that themselves and you can work through the problem solving with them. So you get them thinking much more critically than you would normally in a usual kind of standard lecture format especially. So yeah, I think maximizing the interaction and making sure that the relationship between the students and the teacher is made much more of. So you have that chance to make it more special and more close and more productive by using that time more interactively.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any more questions? Well, what you were talking about just now, answering the question, is just the benefits mostly for the teacher, right? Mm-hmm. And what is the attitude of the students? Did they accept this format of learning? And did they accept it immediately, or there had to be some, period when they get used to it, and it probably requires more of your efforts to somehow make them use it and feel comfortable with it?
Well, all of those really are something to think about. In terms of the benefit for the teacher, it being something where you can make the classroom more interactive, is a real benefit for the students as well, is that they really value the time that they spend online. And I think in terms of student reaction to blended learning, especially at the beginning, it's very different depending on the context and depending on the style of teaching that they were used to before, and depending on how independent they are as learners in general. So not just whether they can study at home alone, but whether they can be independent within the classroom situation as well. So I think when you're moving from a purely face-to-face, teacher-dependent situation into a situation where you have blended learning and the students are expected to develop critical thinking skills, which will help them with, for example, IELTS exams. They're expected to develop the skills of studying independently, of managing their time, of respecting deadlines. There is an amount of training that the teacher needs to do for the students while they are making that transition. So it's not just a question of showing them the LMS or which buttons to click to find the exercises that they have to do, because actually our students can figure that part out quite easily. What they can't necessarily do is act like responsible learners within that environment necessarily. So what you need to train them to do is you show them the platform that you're using, you give them access to the material you want to give them access to, but then you may also need to give them a study plan. So for example, by this week we need to finish this much work, by this week we need to finish this type of activity. Be very explicit with them in the types of things you expect them to do. So when we work online, we have a slight disadvantage in that the teacher is not there to explain immediately when the students have a problem. So what we need to do to counteract that is to be even more clear with our instructions. So for example, if you would like your students to do a forum discussion about some cultural issue, you need to be very clear in the classroom beforehand what you want them to do, why you want them to do it, how it's helpful. Let them know how they'll be assessed, and give them the instructions for any research you want them to do to inform the debate, and give them instructions for any interaction patterns that you want to see. For example, if you want them to work in groups of 5, not a group of 20, so you have smaller group work. So in the classroom, you can give those explanations at the beginning, and if anybody didn't understand, you can say it again, it's not a problem. But when you're working online, you need to make it very, very explicit and absolutely as clear as possible. So planning your instructions is really important. And also making sure that the experience is integrated. So this is something I say all the time, and if you see me again, you'll be bored of hearing it. But the idea is that for the students, it's not 2 separate pathways. It is one pathway that has 2 different sides to it. So with the forum discussion, in class, you set it up. Get them excited about the topic, give them instructions, make sure that they know what is expected of them and what help that they can expect from you as well. Then when they go online, you'll have written explicit instructions about what they're going to do again. They'll have their discussion, the teacher will participate in some way, and at the end, the teacher needs to look at that again for the students in the class. So it's a very clearly motivational way of asking students to do an activity by making sure that it's part of the class, that they go away, they do it, they come back, and the teacher recognizes their work and recognizes their effort. Just, you don't even have to say, congratulations to Sergey or whatever it happens to be, but you just say, that was a good job, that was an interesting point that you raised, but does anybody have any extra comments on that point? So it just means that it's a more organic flow from one side to the other side. So as a student going into this new environment, if you're used to only studying face-to-face and not studying online at all, studying online can seem like, it's a bit different, it's quite isolated, I don't feel I want to do this study by myself. But if the teacher makes it clear that it is part of their overall experience and that it is one single integrated experience, then it's much more motivating for the student to go and do their online work. So I think there are a lot of different things that need to happen. That the teacher needs to become much more of a guide than a lecturer, if you like, and allows the students the space to have the opportunities to discover things. It requires a little shift for the students to get all the benefits they can out of the blended learning experience.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Any more questions, colleagues?
Yes.
Yes, please.
What are the main differences in assessment?
Could you hear that? Shall I repeat it again?
Was it an assessment question?
Assessment in the class and in blended mode learning.
Okay, so in your face-to-face experience, the students have exams, and maybe you will give them a grade for their speaking performance during the lessons, and maybe you will give them a grade for an essay, a piece of writing that they will submit to you. So when you have blended learning, you need all those things, same as before, and additionally, you need to provide a grade for any exercises they do online and any activities that they participate in online. And it needs to be clear that all of those things are part of the same assessment strategy. So if you take the example of Missy's, they have also got grades for participation in forums or blogs, and they have grades for activities that they do online. And they're not alone. A lot of universities do this. When the activities online are optional, the students don't do them. If the activities are assessed and are part of their final grade or count towards their final grade, then participation is much, much higher. So it's much easier to get the students involved. So for any exercises that they do, if you have an LMS, you will see all the grades for that, and you can download the information to put it into your usual system of calculating the grades. So I think in terms of assessment, there are a couple of extra elements that you need to include, but really as a whole, it's very much, it's very similar to what you would have had before. You're just adding in some extras.
Okay, thank you very much, Deidre. And we have to say goodbye to you, unfortunately, because we have the next speaker from the United States in a minute.
Great. Okay, fantastic.
Thank you very much.
Enjoy the rest of your conference.
Thank you, and I hope that next time you will be here in person and we could talk and talk and talk, okay?
Absolutely. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.